I don't know. I have a confession. I started about I started learning about event sourcing about 5 years ago. I spent so much time researching, watching YouTube videos, reading articles. I even gave a talk at a conference on this subject before I had a single line of code in production. So I confess, I am not an expert. I will not have all the answers, but I am passionate about this topic. It wasn't until recently, within the past couple of years, that my team and I started embracing event sourcing. My problem was not, excuse me, my problem was like most of us. I work on legacy code. I generally don't have the opportunity to work on brand new greenfield applications, which makes working with event sourcing so much easier. And while I saw the benefit of event sourcing, I just could not figure out how to embed it into my applications. So a couple of years ago, my team and I started embracing it where we could. We'd bring event sourcing into brand new features where we could treat code as greenfield, where it was new tables, new data. And that's where this presentation comes in. I want to give you a spark, give you something to look forward to bring event sourcing into your application. Now this seems weird. This is for our meetup. I wrote this for a conference on bringing event sourcing into a legacy application. So I sold bits and pieces of this. It's not quite the same, but it's going to be close enough. Oh, I'm glad you asked. My name is John Congdon. I live in San Diego with my beautiful wife and my 2 fantastic children. I am the co-owner of PHP Architect, where we do PHP consulting. We publish a monthly magazine, and we also put on a yearly conference. I am also the co-host of PHP Ugly, which is surprisingly still in, which we're still recording. We are going to record episode 327 tomorrow night. Finally, when I am not spending time with my family, coding, or just responsible adulting, I'm doing something fun. Paragliding. Alright, so let's get started. This could be very awkward because I am controlling 2 machines and not doing it very well so far. So how many people out there have a customer service department? Again, this is for a conference. It doesn't really work. I do, and I have a love-hate relationship with them. When they come to me with complaints and issues, I get excited because I love a good mystery. I feel like Sherlock Holmes, trying to figure out what happened. Why did they come to me with this request? I start digging through the code. Oh, I guess that helps if I keep up on like the slide behind. I start digging through the data. Or I start digging through the code. It's a lot of code. 450,000 lines of code. And a whole lot more of actual crap in there. Oh, I'm off by a slide. That's why it's not matching up. I start digging through the database. That's a lot of data. We got almost 400 tables, 3.4 terabytes of data. When there's issues brought to me, trying to figure out where things are at, can sometimes be a pain in the butt. And then I start digging through the logs if they exist. And when I uncover the answer, I get excited. I feel like the king of the world because, while I may have caused the issue, I at least can solve the issue. But sometimes I dig, and I dig, and I dig, and I just feel overwhelmed because I cannot find the answer. Oops. Too many slides. That's not where I'm supposed to be. this is where I think event sourcing comes in. This could be an oversimplified example that I'm going to go through throughout my slides. We'll get into more of the example later on. But in my day-to-day code, I work with contacts within a CRM. I want to start tracking when a lead was created and then any information about them. Their name was changed, their folder was changed, they were deleted. Any information that happens to a contact or lead, I would like to know about. The problem is, in our system specifically, not only can the user themselves that's logged in change, we work within a team structure. So the team admin can log in as a user. So I want to know, was it the user that was logged in? Was it the admin? On top of that, was it somebody in our CS department that logged in to try and help this user? Was it Frank? Event sourcing, when done right, will help us fill in those gaps of knowledge. See, that's where I had 2 slides. That's where it's messed up. But as a detail, excuse me. This is an oversimplified example, but it is the detail in the event sourcing that can, man, I need new glasses. That's the problem. But it's the detail within event sourcing that can be stored that can help us with the most promise. If you take time to make sure that you are gathering the right amount of data, you can figure out so much. Too much data is better than not enough. I actually have gone so far as thinking I'm going to start storing the entire request of a data, of the entire data of a request. It's a lot of data though, so I haven't done that. But I have done it in one aspect. I've done it when people need to say, I affirm that I am this person, or all this data is correct to my knowledge. In that case, I feel like if I can store everything from their IP address to everything about their system that I can store, maybe that'd be enough information if anything ever went to court. Not that I've ever done that, but hey, why not? So here's an example of data that is stored with an event sourcing event. I guess I should have gone more into event sourcing earlier on, but I did not. So I use an event sourcing library called Event Sauce. So the data that is shown here may be different than the data you would see in your events. Let me back up real quick. Event sourcing is a way of capturing every piece of information along the way. As you insert data into your database, as you update data, as you delete data, it's tracking the state of that thing. Get more into that in a minute. But here's an example of some data. The headers here are maintained by the library itself, Event Sauce. And I say that, but it's not entirely true, as I learned as I was learning. But for the most part, Event Sauce always has when the event happened, the time and date of when it happened, the root type, the root version. So this is a lead. This is version 6. And in this example, the event that has happened is the lead name was changed. We'll get more into that in a little bit. Important part, the event type, lead name was changed. The payload is per event. So in a lead name was changed, we're saying, hey, the new name is John. I don't know what the old name was. I can tell you at this point in time, we are changing the name to John. And the timestamp is this timestamp. I'm going to get into that in a minute. That's why that's there. Yeah, I wouldn't. Some of you may have noticed the timestamp. It's both here and here. Hit the wrong button. The reason being, when I first started using event sauce some 2-3 years ago, I didn't know enough that I had access to this information. I didn't know how to get to the information in the headers, so I'm like, oh, I'm going to store the timestamp with the payload. I think my point in sharing this is there's not a full right way. If you can make something happen, make something work for you, you might as well at least get started. This is where I started. I didn't know I could access this. I stored the timestamp, a carbon immutable object, with my payload, and it worked for me. It worked for a long time. In fact, I still have code that is doing this because I didn't know any better. So my current workflow is pretty simple. Everything is broken down into commands, events, and aggregates. A command is essentially an action. I want to do something. I want to move this lead to a folder in this example. It's a verb. It's what I'm going to do in the system. I'm going to do something on an aggregate. In this case, my aggregate is the lead. The lead in our case is a noun. It's what we're going to do the action on. An aggregate is nothing more than almost like a super class. It's a class that contains all of your data for something. And the result of that command, when it is executed, is, in my case, an array of events of what has happened. Events are always past tense. So I'm going to process this command. I missed a slide in here. I'm going to process this command. Ultimately, it's going to return a list of events that will get stored with the aggregate and ultimately get persisted into the database. In my case, this repository is nothing more than a database connection that says, hey, save everything that has happened at this point. So let's look at the command a little bit more. A command, in my case, again, event sourcing is very loose. There's no real rules behind it. The way I use a command is it makes my pass-fail decisions. It's going to say this command can be done on this aggregate or it can't. In general, a command either returns an array of events, and those events could be success or failure events, or it throws an exception. There should be no other outcomes from this. So in this example, I want to move a lead to a folder. Does this pass my business logic? In my case, my business logic could be as simple as, does the user have access to this folder? Yes. Okay. Lead was moved to a folder. No, lead was not moved to a folder. There are pros and cons to both. You can either store the failed events, which sometimes I like to do, or you can throw an exception. Throwing an exception is really nice because the consuming code can easily catch that and relay an event, or relay the message back to the user saying, hey, this doesn't work. You need to fix this. So if you're trying to bring event sourcing into your application, the one big thing you need to remember, event sourcing only affects the parts of your application that write data. So again, this was originally written for bringing event sourcing into a legacy application. If you currently have an application that is reading and writing from a couple of places, as long as you can change the places that are writing your data, whether it being insert, updating, or deleting, to use event sourcing, the rest of your application will continue to work. If you have reporting or any other code that is reading from that data, you should be good to go. This was another big win for me. And this took me a long time to get my head wrapped around, and once I did, it was like a light bulb went off. And then when I started teaching other people event sourcing, trying to teach them this, it's so hard. As developers, we so badly want to think about our code in terms of tables, of where our data is stored. I have a user. My user data is here. I have email addresses. My email addresses are here. I have addresses. My addresses are over here. You don't have to think about it that way. When you start thinking in terms of event sourcing, you have an aggregate. You have a user. My user has these properties. Maybe they have multiple addresses. Maybe they have a single address. Maybe they have they have a date of birth. They have multiple email addresses. There's so much that can go on with the user. And if you stop thinking about it in terms of database structure and in terms of my class and the architecture of that, it starts to make so much more sense. And we're going to touch a lot on this in the demo that I'm going to do at the end. But getting your mind out of being trapped in the terms of your database makes so much more sense. All right, I'm going to do a live demo. As an organizer, I always say don't do a live demo, and this is going to go horribly, but let's do a live demo. The problem is I am connected to your machine and you don't have my code. This is where things get funky. That's not going to work so well. We are going to, if you're watching the live stream, you're about to get screwed up. Sorry. So, oh, actually, that's not going to work because that won't show up on the screen. Well, you might be too loud on that thing. You can turn volume down on that. There's also the volume on the actual ATEM. Crap. How do I do a live demo when you don't have my code? There you go. That works. That does not work. All right, let's figure this out. Well, I probably should have. I wasn't expecting it to have to use AirPlay. That's all I'm saying. No, we didn't think about all the things. These are things we're going to have to think about at Tech. By the way, if you want to come to Tech, pay attention. We'll maybe give you a discount code. Well, let's see. Eric, can I clone to your machine? Eric, are you listening to me? Can I clone to your machine? I'm asking if I can clone your machine. If I give you access to this repo, can I clone your machine so you can run this? Well, oh, no, you need PHP 8.2. This ain't going to work. Actually, I've got all the databases and everything on my machine. This ain't going to work. Sorry if you're watching live, this ain't going to work. That's what I'm saying. Don't do a live demo. Never do a live demo. It's not even that. I have databases set up for the demo portion of it. That works. I do have tail scale installed. To do what? That doesn't work. Oh man! I'm so excited about this. Sorry. Forgive me. I don't know. Oh yeah, forget. I'm wearing a.
Says that you should call event sourcing fact sourcing. Fact sourcing. It's facts, not opinions. They are. As long as you can touch something's happening. Manipulate them. Yeah, it's something is coming into this, so that's like event happening. So what are you gonna do factually? What's your plan?
I don't know. I can share easily to the stream, but I can't share up on the screen. That's the problem. You can share the stream. Take that.
Okay.
Go to the stream. Although they're going to be 30 seconds delayed. That ain't going to work so well, but.
What's going to the stream then? Oh, you want me to share on here?
Right.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's good for us.
It's going to be very delayed, is what the problem is going to be. Yeah, I don't know.
Batteries would die.
Not mine. There's no sound. Oh, man. Man.
No, he hears sound. So, John, you
Neil's like, why did I show up for this? Neil's like, why did I show up?
lots of bald head action.
You can turn off picture in picture if I'm going to sit over here.
Jeez. That's pretty savage. What, is this new to you?
It is easy to do. There you go. All right.
I'm going to wash my hand with the beer.
But you need to switch to one, whatever one is. Oh, switch to two.
I'll finish the job. I worked on it. You need to finish things. I'll finish this. Yeah, right.
You got pizza and beer out of it. See, my screen's still not up there, and it's been up. It's what's supposed to be showing for a while now. Oh, you know what it is? I'm not mirroring.
It's up there.
Yeah, I'm not mirroring. That's the problem. I am not mirroring from here to there.
This is like a TikTok. It's so sparkly.
Yeah, I know. That's what I'm saying. But I wasn't mirroring. We're good now. All right. Can we mute the TV? We need to mute the TV. I got the remote. Hey, Kendrick, how do we mute this thing? No, it's the TV. We're hearing through the TV.
That's awesome.
All right, we're good to go. We're good to go. We're back. All right, so here's what I've got. All right, so I created a few branches. I want to show you guys the basics of event sourcing to start. So I'm gonna come over here, starting with, go here, whoops, close that out. I think there's a way to get into view presentation mode. Appearance. Oh, is that how you do that?
Shift is everything, man.
Presentation mode. That didn't work. You were wrong. presentation mode. That goes into settings.
Is that the top, very top?
That's what I did.
Freaking I am responding to the screen.
You just did it like he's 30 seconds
So
ahead.
far ahead of us.
This is so bad. Enter presentation mode. That's what I wanted to do. All right. So what I wanted to show is I have a simple index.php file. Everything is done via the CLI. It's not done in a web browser just for ease. I am simply making a connection to a database. As you can see here, it's called ES101, Event Sourcing 101. I am using the event source library. So I have a, let's see, we've got the message repository, which basically stores all of our events that have happened. We have a message dispatcher, which we'll get to in a little bit. We have an event sourced aggregate root repository. This is how we get everything out for our aggregate roots. Again, the aggregate root is nothing more than a noun. My example code is all around a shopping cart. So the aggregate root is the cart itself. This is a CLI command. I'm using the Symfony CLI composer package. So I have a way to init a cart, add an item, remove an item, adjust, and list. Quite straightforward, quite easy. Let me come in here. So if I were to do a PHP index.php, I simply get my list of commands. Let's see, can I easily zoom in here? There we go. That will be much better. So, doing a simple cart init. You guys are watching up there, but you're delayed. So you're screwed. I'm going to do a simple cart init that simply gives me a UUID to my cart. I'm going to copy this. I'm now going to go do the same thing. Index. I'm going to add an item. So I'm going to do cart, item, add. I'm going to say which cart I want to add to. If you're thinking in terms of a website, this could be gotten out of your session, this could be gotten out of a cookie, this could be gotten out of a database. It depends on how you are storing this information. You get the product information is all the same, sort of. It's mostly going to be out of a database. My product ID is going to be 1, and then I'm going to add 2 of that product. Again, being a CLI means absolutely nothing, but the point is, if I were to go PHP index cart item list, and I would list that same cart, you would see I've got a quantity of 2, and each one is $4.99 for product 1. If I were to change this and say, hey, I want to add product 2, and I'm going to add 2 of those, and again I list it, you can see I now have added product 2 with quantity of 2, product, or the cost is $19.99 per product for that one. Sorry guys, this is very delayed. No, because I'm going to show you that in a little bit. That's the most amazing part. What I want to show you next. See, this is where we need the HDMI splitter. That would have made things so much better. I'm going to go into my database, into this database, and in my events, the other thing I wanted to show, again, you're not seeing it on screen yet, the only table I have right now is my events table. All I have in here are the events that have happened for this these carts. I have a handful of carts in here. What I wanted to show you is the aggregate root ID. So back over here on my CLI, my aggregate root ID is 9E420. Starting with that, looking in the database, you can see I have a few of those, so I'm going to simply do aggregate root ID like 9E420. E420. Why did that not work? That didn't work. Aggregate root ID, like 9E420. Huh. Oh, you know what's going on? I'm not very smart. Alright, okay. So, this is a UUID. It is currently stored as binary, and I'm not very good at binary yet within the event source and context. So, I'm going to show you as if these were the only ones that existed. We have our aggregate root ID. Again, we're only looking at these few rows where we've added a couple of products. The thing I want to point out that's a little different than normal is this is not in there by default. By default, that's part of the payload, and I'm going to show you in the code how that is rectified. I'm going to bring this over into here. Get out of there. Go to JSON formatter, because that's what I like to do. By default, event sauce gives you these headers, time of reporting, the reporting format, the route that it's happened on, so it happened on the shopping cart. The event that happened was the item was added, and then you have the payload. So in my case, I have a line item. In my line item, it's simply a serialized bit of information. In the database, however, you will see I've added this event type as a column. The beauty of this, and why I like this, is oftentimes I go to the database looking for information, and I care about the events that have happened, and trying to look through the headers to say, what event happened? Not hard, but when you have to sit here and look through a big string of text. It's a text column by default. So the question was, you save the payload as JSON or as text. I think by default it is a text column, so if I were to come over here and expand this out and say what type of column is this, the payload is a bar chart. You can write your own, what's it called? You can write your own class. It's not a command. Your own persistence layer that will record the data you want. By default, what comes with event sauce there's two different types of schemas. There's a legacy schema, which I'm using here, and then there is the more traditional. I think the biggest difference is the root ID being binary or not. But it is very customizable. Like I said, I am adding into the table the event type that's not there by default. And I wanted to show that real quick over here. So when I get set up, actually, see when I set up the message repository, which is how these events are saved to the database, I'm including, here's a connection. So this is a doctrine connection. The table is going into is the events. The serializer, which is how these events are serialized by default. It works just fine. And then I have the shopping cart table schema. And in here, I really just copied the default table schema, except for the additional columns. And I said, oh, I have a new column I want to save. I want to include what is in the underscore event type which is part of the headers. I want to store this in a different column. And again, you don't have to do this, but I personally have found that when I'm looking through the event table, I care about what events happened in what order. So when I'm listing, I'll look for an aggregate root ID and I'll list a bunch of events. Having to look through that payload header, trying to find the event type, can be a pain in the ass. Having it as a separate column in the table makes it a little easier, so I can say, oh, this was a series of events that have happened. That's just me. I actually just learned this yesterday or the day before as I was preparing for this talk. So I will definitely be using this a lot more. Any questions? Thing that I love about Event Sauce, their focus on testing is fantastic. So when I come in here to my tests, again, I didn't in the previous branch for this test. I have this aggregate, which all this does is do a bunch of setup for me and does things that would be useful for a bunch of other test classes. The big one being handle. So I am processing a bunch of commands that have happened, persisting them to the database, and then the rest of this is just part of the event sourcing, the event sauce library. In my shopping cart test, I had this guard. The very first event has to be cart. If it's not, things break because you cannot access variables that have not been initialized. You need to get into a initial state in order to proceed. So all I'm saying is, given a product, if I try to add an item to a cart that doesn't exist, I want to fail. I haven't initialized my cart. Okay. Let me bring this up in a separate window. Can I make that go away? Yeah, there we go. Looking at my this is not best. This is PHP unit. With what? What's the question? That is, so this when expected to fail is part of event sauce.
Oh, okay.
Right. That's part of the. So this is extending the shopping cart aggregate test case, which is extending the aggregate root test case. So this is all event sauce at this point, but it's all based on PHP unit. When I go to process, I'm saying I'm going through my array of commands. I have this simple guard clause. Again, your guard clause can be way more advanced. A very simplistic example. Hey, make sure the cart was initialized. When we here, we're saying, hey, if this is an initialized cart command, just return it. We're accepting it. I should say, hey, is this an initialized command and is it the first event? Because if we got an initialized cart command later, that would be bad. Again, it shouldn't happen, but it could. You should have it in the guard clause. So, assuming this is the initialized cart command, we're going to get past it. We're going to move on. Otherwise, we're going to say, hey, was the status set? And if not, we're going to say, hey, throw an error, throw an exception because we got into this code. We shouldn't have gotten into here. We're good to go. We need to fail. So that's all this test is doing. An item can be added. So now I'm saying, given a cart was initialized, this is the big thing. Given is my setup. I'm saying my cart was initialized when I add an item and I give it a product and a quantity. I expect I get an event saying item was added. Again, items are always past tense, things have happened. So given I initialized my cart, added an item, I should get an event, item was added. I can further check it by saying, hey, give me, I call it SUT, my system under test, which is going to be my cart in this case. And I want to say, I should have exactly one item in here at this point. One line item, not one item in general, one line item.
That's nice.
It's, yeah, testing is super nice and easy. I have a test. Multiple items can be added. Again, I have product 1, give me product ID 1, product ID 2. I haven't gone into the product service, which is just an array of products. Ideally, you would get this out of a database. But I'm adding 2 distinct items. I'm adding one of each. So again, given my cart was initialized, when I add product 1, when I add product 2, I don't really need multiple when clauses. I can just do new add item, comma, new add item, because this accepts a ... arguments. Then I expect these 2 different item was added events to be fired. I added 2 items, I got 2 events. When I get my system under test, when I get this aggregate, I should have 2 distinct items in my cart. I really wish the screen was up today so you guys could stay up with me. Alright, I'm going to move on. Adding the same product twice. In this case, if I add the same product and then I add it again, I really just want to increase my quantity. I'm not looking to have 2 separate line items in my cart. Product, I don't know why I called this product 2, but I expect a new line item. I am adding, given my cart was initialized, because that is my initial state all the time. When I add of this product, then I add 2 of the same product, I expect 2 different items added, events. Different line items. I'm going to get a line item, in this case, 1 quantity. But then I added 2, so now I'm going to have a line item with 3, right? When I get my system under test, I should have exactly 1 item in there because it's the same item. But my quantity is going to be 3. I added 1, then 2. And then very similarly, I'm going to remove an item to adjust the cart just properly. So given my product, I'm going to, given my cart was initialized, I'm going to add the item, I'm going to remove the item, I'm going to make sure that my item was added, my item was removed, and at the end of the day, I expect there to be 0 items in my cart. I'm just going to run this for funsies, run, and we can see that I had 5 tests, 28 assertions, everything ran very fine. You can't see that yet, but you'll get there, trust me. Alright, so far, remember I've talked about event sourcing. Don't worry about your database structure. You don't need to worry about that quite yet. When you're first starting out, get your aggregate in a way that makes sense to your business. And I think that's what this all comes down to. If you do any sort of DDD, everything comes down to your business rules, what makes sense for your domain, and that's where I think this shines quite a bit. So what I did was looking at projecting, oops, and come back here to my index. The only thing I really changed in here was in my dispatcher. Let me make this my only screen. All I said was, when we go to persist this aggregate, I also want to call this user mapper projection. My goal with this, hey, when we save the shopping cart, I wanted to also map this cart to a user. So let's say my cookies or my session knows who my user is that's logged in. I want to be able to get their cart out of the database. So as I run through this, when I come over here to my tables, I'm now going to have a user cart map, which I created previously. And I'm going to have my user, which in my case makes no sense because it's a random number, but the point is, if you had an actual user ID, you can store it in here. So when I come back over to here and I say PHP index cart init, I'm initializing a new cart. In this case, it is starting with D659. And when I come over here and refresh this, I now have a new mapping that says user 303 has a new cart. And this only happens on cart initialization. So let's go look at this user mapper projection. User mapper projection implements the message consumer. And all we're going to do is say, hey, we're going to get a message in. We're going to check the event. If it is not of type cart was initialized, we don't care. Get out of here. We're assuming that we made it through this code at some point. Assuming this is cart was initialized, and assuming we only allow this once per aggregate, we're going to say, hey, insert into our user cart map. And again, I'm being very lazy and saying my user ID is random, but you should inject this into our mapper and say, this is what we're doing. What was the,
No, just how you're persisting that. That's what you can use. It's not basically your event stuff. Check this stuff.
yeah. So this is how, as you're saving data, you can insert and update data along the way. So you can do it easily through these projections. I'm always showing this handle method. There's a way of saying handle cart was initialized, and then that method will only be called if cart was initialized. And event sauce actually has where you can say, given any method, it will use reflection to say, hey, this is based on, whoops. Yeah, so it will use magic and say, cart was initialized or item was added. So in this case, this method would be called. But you also have to include some other magic in here. And I think there's a trait you need to add. So that's projecting in a nutshell. That this is a very simplistic example of projections. We are going to then look at, yeah, yes. So the question being projections right to the other tables, and that is correct. So in general, if you bring everything into your aggregate and then project out to your current tables, if you're working in a legacy project and you project it the same way the rest of your code used to do it, now all the parts of your code that read the data work. So if you have reporting, the reporting all continues to work. As long as you change the parts that write and they update the data the way your old code used to, it works great. Yeah. One of the big questions I had when I started getting into this was, what is too many events? What happens if I have 1,000 events? Right? My initial, we look back at the branch, I had no other table. I was constantly reading this whole list of events. Just for fun, I have this branch that has many events. let's look at that table. If we go into here and look at my events, I've got 100,000 events all with the same aggregate root. Spoiler alert. 100,000 events all with the same aggregate root. How long will it take to add a new item? Time. 30 seconds. Index, cart, item. Actually,
It'll be almost instantaneous.
I forgot I had this in here already. Let's look at that. All right. Copy, paste. We're going to time how long it takes to add an item. That's not what oh, I'm sorry, we're not adding an item. I forgot, I have this cart item list which lists all the items within a cart. But we have to remember that it's got to read all 100,000 in the database. I'm on a laptop. It's not a very powerful laptop. Hopefully your web server is much faster. But in general, you should never have 100,000 records for any aggregate. If you do, congratulations, you're doing something right. You're busy. So I ran this. All I'm doing is saying, hey, I've got in my cart, product 1, I've got 100,001 items. They're $4.99 each. I read in all 100,000 records, looped over every single one of them to update my aggregate along the way, and it took 1.8 seconds on my laptop via Docker, not production, not a BB database. In general, you should never reach this. If you do, there are ways around this. I started to get into it with snapshotting. I did not get to that. So snapshotting says every X events, maybe every 100,000 events, I'm going to snapshot on my aggregate. So now, instead of reading 1,000, I start here and I read what happened after that. I didn't get to that point. I don't store that many events per aggregate, so I never really run into this.
So that's the secret. Don't store it.
There you go.
But if you get to, but like you said, there may be a situation you could have
Right.
because you're busy.
Exactly.
Right? You're doing a lot of good, you're doing a lot of work, and so then a snapshot is really, I would have to right.
Oh, I did create a branch for snapshotting. My commit on it is it failed because I couldn't figure it out. I just, again, last minute, I didn't get to it. It didn't work for me.
Event sauce wraps around proof, doesn't it?
I don't know. No, I don't think so.
I thought it does.
Does it?
Because I remember proof had that to be the thing.
No, it has it. I just, being last minute, the documentation needs improving. I've submitted a couple of ours to their documentation. They have this whole thing around snapshotting, but it's very limited on how to make it work. And it's like, I want that next step. I want that example code. I want to know what do I need to make it work. I found a packages repo out there that does it, and I started implementing it. But again, it was today prior to giving this presentation, so I kind of ran out of time. The other thing I want to point out was custom headers, and hence me having a branch on that. Come back to assuming your events aren't stored in the same database.
Yes, they're not supposed to.
Yeah, that's something I didn't really get into so far in my presentation is your event store doesn't have to be MySQL. I use MySQL because it works for me, but there are a document store would work. There is actually Event Store DB, which is there's a database meant specifically for event sourcing. But MySQL has worked for me. I've used it for a while without issues.
But aren't you at the point that, I mean,
If you drop your database, yeah. Right.
Should always.
I,
Good practice.
I've screwed up my tables by dropping a table. I've never screwed up my database by dropping a database. But I've had server failures, so I guess that would count. we had people drop tables. That is true.
Luckily, it was
Yeah. The next thing I wanted to point out, which was a huge benefit to me when I learned that you can do this, was storing additional headers. So I talked about how the headers are managed by event sauce, but you can actually store additional information in the headers. So where I used to store a timestamp with every event in the payload, I was like, oh wait, I can store that in the header, but the header already has that. In addition, I used to say, I want to know who performed this action, whether it is the user that is logged in as, the user who is logged in, or maybe it's a customer service person who is logged in. I want to know who did this action. Maybe I want to know more information. I want to know what their IP address was. I have an example here what their user agent was. Why? I don't know. I'm just showing an example. But you can store information on every single event that happens globally versus having to think about it per event. And that is simply by adjusting this message decorator chain. So by default, event sauce will bring in the default headers, which includes time of recording, the event type, everything we've already seen. So you always want to include the default headers decorator. But maybe in addition, you want to say, hey, I want to store the user that was logged in. In my case, 999, but hopefully you got this out of your database, cookie, their session, you know who's really logged in. In addition, I want to store their user agent with every single one. Why? Just because I can, and I'm trying to show that you can store arbitrary data along with every single event. When we're looking at this, we're simply have a class that is implementing the message decorator. You're going to decorate the message that comes in. You're going to say, hey, I'm going to add an additional header. Don't overwrite the headers that are already there because you're dumb if you do. I'm going to add this user agent header. I'm going to get it out of my server. Definitely not the best way to do this, but as an example, it works. If it doesn't exist, I'm going to assume it is the CLI. Seems to make sense to me, right? So let's jump over here to 6. Look in my events, and in here we should be able to see currently I've got nothing in my user agent. I initialize the cart. If I come back in here and I say PHP index cart init, I'm initializing a new cart starting with 055BB. Refresh this. You will see I have a user agent of CLI, and this is my cart 055BB. Again, storing additional information. I'm sorry, I misspoke a little bit. This actually gets stored as a header within the payload itself. Right. So I have this user agent as a CLI, but then also within the code, back here to index, in my shopping cart table schema, that's what I forgot to say. I said, hey, also store the user agent that is in the payload in this column, in the user agent column. So earlier it was, hey, store the event type and because it was an event sauce specific header, it's prefixed with underscore underscore, and it's stored in the events type column. This is, I want to take the user agent that I stored in there, and I want to put it in this column. And this does nothing more than when I am when I'm doing that research, when I said I feel like Sherlock Holmes and I'm trying to figure out what's happened, I can easily pull up this events table and I can say, hey, what happened in here? What were the events that happened? I want to see those versus having to dig into the paper. This is for me. It's not for anything else. When you're using event sauce, all it cares about is, hey, give me the root ID, give me all the events that have happened for this root, and I'm going to replay the payload on top of it. When I'm doing research, I'm going to come in here, I want to see this level of detail. Okay, and when I come back here to where I had 100,000 events, I want to be able to scroll through here and say, assuming I'm looking for this specific aggregate root, if I sort this by version, I should be able to see in order. And I want to say, oh, you did this right here. You did this right, or you updated this negative way, which isn't always available, which is frustrating. All right. And I think the last thing I wanted to show, because we're on 6 right now, replaying messages. And this is what Frank was getting to earlier. The beauty of event sourcing is I could be storing events for days, weeks, months, years, collecting data, not knowing how I want to use that data. When I started researching event sourcing, the most famous thing I heard about was taking a shopping cart example where you are adding and deleting items all the time. I added this to my cart, I removed it. I added something else, I removed it. You know, usually in traditional CRUD code, insert, we delete. We insert, we delete. But we don't know into their cart. What happened to them in the future? We don't know traditionally. But through event sourcing, if we're capturing all those events along the way, 2 years down the road, we might say, hey, I inserted an item. Did they come back and buy it later? Somebody who added an item, did they buy something similar later? We don't always know. But having the is fantastic. So if we're capturing as much data, or if we decide all of a sudden we need to report on this data, I can now take this data and so where I said, hey, I'm now going to project that this user has this. That's very simplistic. I can come back 2 years later and say, I want a whole new table schema that is perfectly suited, perfectly indexed for this type of query. Your reporting becomes so much easier. Right.
Because that's the thing, like you're like all the things that are happening. What's the user doing? You did this, did that, this time. You totally see their behavior. It's really simple.
It is.
Just a lot of data.
Abandoned shopping cart example. Right?
Yeah.
Yep. See how many times people have done things where it could be a problem on the site before. Like, wow, it was considered those either drop off or come back later. It's getting frustrating.
Let's see, where did I have that? So my example was I have a new table. Come back over here to data group, and it might not be easy to see, but I have this branch 7. So in here, I created quantity lifetime sold. In this fictitious world, I want to know how many of these items were added to my cart. I say sold, I screwed it up because it's not a full example. How many times was this item added to my cart? I can tell you currently, I've got 100,000 records in here, but my table is blank, is empty. I don't know. So if I were to come in here and run this script, actually, before I do that, let's just look at it real quick. It's real simple. Vendor autoload normal, bootstrap, all it does is do database connections and set up a little bit of the event sourcing stuff. The big thing is, I'm going to look in this table. Examples say, hey, just start. But that doesn't help me because there are times where I may stop in the middle of this code. This may be running for hours, days, months. What happens if I stop in the middle? Okay. So I changed it up a little bit. I said, hey, I'm going to start storing. What's my current this specific, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to go from the start. I'm going to start from 0. If I stored something previously, I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to start from there. And by default, your limit is 100. By default, I'm working on 100 at a time. Simply go through and replay. This is the example almost verbatim outside of me. Hey, every time we have messages handled, I'm going to insert this into the table and say, hey, I've replayed 100 so far, I'm good to go. So if I run this is going to run over that 100,000, and as I run through this, it's going to say, hey, I've got 1 of product 2, 5 of 3, and the rest of these are really product 1 because that's my example so far. And this is just going to keep running. I can stop this, and this will just stop right here. And then I can just pick it back up. And it's not going to start from scratch. It's just going to keep up and keep going. Okay, so we're going to pick up until this gets to 100,000. So this is where replaying your events to set up a new table for a new report, a new piece of data that somebody said, hey, I wonder why this works. I wonder what happened if somebody removed stuff from their cart. What happened to that? Did they come back? Did they buy something else? Did they buy the same thing? If you have the events, you can replay them, you can figure things out. As you're storing the events along the way, there's a lot more. My example is very simplistic of adding a simple item, but we all know that big gamers storing so much more data about us. So much about us that they can figure things out way more granular than we would like to think. Right. It's friggin' scary.
That person starting out in PHP doesn't really understand. Like they might start blocking things, taking certain things, to realize that this is a concept of a proven pattern that you can use to solve these particular problems that already exist, and that's what this is how you do it. Like that's nice. It's a lot of times you're like, oh man, I tried to do this the wrong way for so long, I didn't realize like, oh, this is a solved problem.
Yeah.
Address current limit is, someone who was trying to order tickets for the mayor company, so now we're doing certain pricing.
Yeah.
So going back through, looking at what time of the day do you want to sell, usually what time of day do you expect that ticket, and on the fly, like virtual time, projecting what price ownership this person. We actually have a client that was like that. It's really big and sort of curious really wants to sell that. But being able to say, hey, if I'm selling spots at this rate, start jacking up the price.
Yeah. Given the right events, you can make much better decisions for your business. Whether it's good for the end consumer or not, it's another story, but when it comes to us running a business, us writing code for our clients, these are the things we need to think about. Of course, yeah. Yeah, always. All right, so in conclusion, event sourcing isn't easy, at least at first. It is definitely a powerful tool once you get your head wrapped around everything that it can do. Understanding how your data can change over time is important. Figuring out how you want to start storing those events, how you want to start mapping those events out. There is a fantastic site called eventstorming.com, I think it's called, that gives an idea of how to bring your team together, developers and non-developers, and it is very important to bring the business people into play at this point. We're trying to speak business terms, not developer terms. So when they say an item was added to their cart, they may mean something different than we mean. We need to make sure that we are on the same page. So event storming is one of the ways we make that happen. And I've tried it a few times. I have failed. It is not easy to bring non-developers into this, especially when those non-developers think they're developers. Event sourcing allows you to optimize your data at a later time. And all I mean by that is gathering as much data now as you can. If you're capturing it along the way, even if you don't know what you need later, it would help. The shopping cart example is a big one. I'm adding items, I'm deleting items. Traditionally, in CRUD style, we inserted, we deleted. Once you delete, you have no clue that it happened. If you are storing those events of, I've added this item, I've deleted this item, even if your projection deletes the record from the table, having those events along the way, later on we can make good decisions based on that. We wouldn't know that without the events. Allowing you to optimize your data at a later time, all that means is we don't have to decide how our database is laid out. We don't need to know our database schema as we are creating these aggregates. We don't necessarily need to know the table structure, whether it is a varchar, binary, any of that information. If we can start gathering the data within an aggregate, we can figure out how we need to project that to tables later for perfect querying. We can improve our query times, our report times, simply by how we store the data. And finally, it gives you the ability to answer questions you haven't even thought about. Going back to the shopping cart, maybe you didn't think about what happens if somebody removes an item from the cart. You can start analyzing that data later. Somebody asks, you may not know. The project I work on all the time. What happens if somebody says hummus? You never. That when I get a Slack message, it says hummus. Somebody. So somebody may ask you, what happens when this happens in the data? And if you're not storing those events, you have no clue. So store everything you can up front, and you might be able to answer it later on, even if you don't have it projected properly at that point. And with that, I am done. Thank you. Yes. You can turn the sound up now, please. All right, thank you everyone for watching. Bye. You don't have to. You can leave them running, unless somebody has something you want to talk about.
Turn down the latency on the bottom.
Is there a latency option?
There is a latency option. I've been itching to touch it.
Oh, yeah.
So we are streaming from the ATEM through his little wire here into his wall out to the cloud to our own cast server.
So just for shits and giggles, try to switch the slides and see what's going on.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
You
6.
might have to stop the stream and start it again for the reduced latency to take effect.
You probably don't want it to reduce. I mean, obviously in this situation we would.
It would definitely take, would take more.
Yeah, you probably don't want that though. We probably want it. Hey, I'll tell you what you want. No, seriously, this has been
Oh,
something
it
I've
actually said right there, your latency settings will take effect extinction.
been awesome. This really has been something I've been passionate about. I've been working on it a lot as of late.
It's tricky stuff.
It is. The examples I've shown where I was storing a timestamp, I was storing the timestamp in the payload, really was because I couldn't figure out how to get to. Yeah, I couldn't get it to stop earlier. It took forever. I don't know what that's about. It didn't record to the local hard drive. We got to figure that out. That was a whole.
Local hybrid is what we can this whole time. Like it is being recorded to, but it's heavy. Don't stop.
We probably need to format it. I did not do that. Aw, thank you, A Woods. Oh, he's not listening anymore.
No, apparently he is.
We really have to figure out the. I mean, here we need to do the HDMI splitting or something.
So the good news is we had the most I saw were 8 viewers in the server network application. There's a huge difference from what we saw before.
70% is still pretty high, though.
Well, I'm sorry, like, it was over, 65%.
Neil, you coming up PHP Tech? What? That was a weird face. Don't say Laracon. I'll kick you in the nuts right now.
It's simply Congdon.
Thank you.